Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tom Van Der Rostein, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday, except this one, which is the third Wednesday, of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. We are also on Twitter, if you so choose. Our topic and speakers today is the 3rd Congressional District Debate. I will briefly introduce each of the speakers today. Vickie Yates Brown Glisson is here with us today. She is a lifelong Kentuckian who learned the value of hard work, responsibility, and perseverance while growing up on her family's farm. She's a nationally recognized lawyer with a 30-year career in healthcare law and most recently served in the Bevin administration as Kentucky's Secretary for Health and Family Services. She was appointed by the governor in 2015, tackling some of the biggest issues in Kentucky, including reforming the child welfare system, working to establish family drug courts, and saving the state over $30 million annually through implementing reforms and efficiencies. Ms. Glisson has received praise for her work in healthcare law and government regulation, including the Distinguished Citizen Award by Louisville Mayor David Armstrong in 2002. She was named the 2013 Woman of Influence by Louisville's Business First magazine and received the Greater Louisville, Inc. 2013 Silver Fleur-de-Lis Award for fostering technology research. That same year, Ms. Glisson was also a finalist for Business First Louisville Business Leader of the Year Award. She also was elected by her peers to the Health Law section of the American Bar Association. Ms. Glisson and her husband, Colonel Sean D. Glisson, MD USA, retired, live in Louisville, where her husband practices medicine with Norton Healthcare, an oncologist and hematologist. He helped establish Louisville's first medical home for those with sickle cell disease. Her daughter, Stephanie Pearl Glisson, also lives in Louisville with her husband, Fido. Congressman John Yarmuth represents Kentucky's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was first elected in 2007. Now in his 6th term, Congressman Yarmuth serves as a top Democrat in the House Budget Committee. He has been recognized for his work to improve education, expand access to affordable health care, and revitalize manufacturing in Louisville. Born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, Congressman Yarmuth graduated from Atherton High School and Yale University, majoring in American Studies, and attended the Georgetown University Law Center. He and his wife, Kathy, have one son, Aaron, who's the owner and editor of Leo Weekly. And our moderator today is Lawrence Smith. Lawrence is a self-described Air Force brat who grew up on military bases all over the world. He graduated from high school in the tiny town of Limestone, Maine, near the Canadian border. He has a broadcasting degree from Eastern Kentucky University and has studied theology at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has lived in Louisville for more than 20 years. He's a TV news veteran, having worked at stations in Lexington, Kentucky, Knoxville, Tennessee, and Houston, Texas, as well as Louisville. He has covered politics, including campaigns from Gerald Ford to George W. Bush. Lawrence and his wife, Garnetta, have 2 grown sons, Jason and Edward. At this time, I'm going to turn over the program to Lawrence Smith, and everybody please give our guests a warm welcome.
I need to mention one very important fact that Tom overlooked, and that is I work for WDRB. That's who I'm with now. I've worked for about every other station in town, but I'm currently working for WDRB. It's a pleasure to be here. It's fun to be part of something we've not seen in quite a while, several years, and that's an intriguing and competitive race for the 3rd District Congressional seat. So we look forward to what both candidates have to say today. We flipped the coin beforehand to see who goes first, to have 5 minutes for opening a statement, and we've also agreed to go by first name. So we'll be referring to each other as John and Vickie, as will I. All right. Congressman John Yarmuth, you won that toss, so you have chosen to go first.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thanks to the Louisville Forum. I'm a proud alum of the board of the Louisville Forum, and I appreciate the important role it plays in facilitating the kind of discussion we're going to have today. I want to thank my wife, Kathy, and my son, Aaron, and his wife, Sarah, for joining me and for all the support they give, and also my staff who over here, both my Louisville staff, official staff, and also my campaign staff. When I first ran for office in 2006, I did it because I was very frustrated with the administration of George W. Bush. I was upset about massive tax cuts that went to the wealthiest Americans, and I was also very upset about our unjustified, unwarranted participation in the war in Iraq. I thought then that if I could be part of the 15 seats that needed to flip to take control of the House of Representatives and put a stop to the Bush agenda, that I would have contributed something important. Well, here I am 12 years later, and the stakes are much higher. I'm not given to hyperbole. I don't usually exaggerate. I don't usually get overly upset. But I am more afraid for the sustainability of our democracy today than I have ever been in my life. And I think that anybody who is not concerned about the future of our democracy needs to pay more attention. We have an administration in Washington that on a daily basis undermines the very foundations of our democracy. An administration that continually undermines the media in this country, jeopardizes the First Amendment and how that works to support democracy. An administration that criticizes our judicial system and undermines credibility in that important foundational structure of our government, of our balance of powers. An administration that has decimated our diplomatic corps and has injured our status around the world. An administration that has hollowed out many of our government agencies so they're not even able to function properly. And an administration that has also criticized our intelligence organization and damaged their ability to function effectively around the world. And finally, an administration that from almost top to bottom is full of corruption, starting with the president, who on a daily basis violates the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, and going right down through much of his cabinet. So when I ran first in 2006, I never thought I would be back here in 2012 asking you to send me back. But in 2006, I never thought we would have a government that separates children from their parents. I never thought we'd have a government that removes many of the important protections we have to guarantee that we have clean air and clean water for our citizens. I never thought I'd see a government that gives tax cuts to the very wealthiest Americans and corporations and then asks for the average citizen to pay for it with cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, as Majority Leader McConnell suggested yesterday. I never thought that I'd see a government that actually tries to limit our access to health care rather than expand it. I never thought I'd see a government that undermines public education in the country as this one has done. I never thought that I would see an administration that undermines labor unions as well, weakening their ability to bargain for a better standard of living for them and their families. In short, there is a lot at stake in this election. And now, with a chance to retake the majority as a Democrat and to try to deal with some of the damage that has been done to this country, this is not the time for me to give up this position willingly. So I'm aggressively seeking re-election. I learned very early in this job that while part of it is legislating, a much larger part of it is connecting with your constituents and making them know that they have a connection to their government and they have someone who is willing to listen and to understand, be willing to understand the challenges that they face. Because ultimately government should be about making life easier for its citizens to the extent government can do that. And that's what I've been about. So I look forward to this discussion. I think that you will see a clear distinction between Vickie and me as we go through the conversation, and I look forward to drawing that comparison. So thank you all very much for being here.
Vickie, please, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Sure. I'm Vickie Yates Glisson, and I'm the candidate for Congress for the 3rd Congressional District. And I really want to thank you all for asking me to be able to be here this afternoon with you. I want to thank the Louisville Forum for hosting this debate. I want to thank Lawrence for being a part of it. I thank the congressman for the opportunity to be able to discuss issues. And I want to thank each of you for caring enough to be here to hear this discussion. So thank you. I look forward to discussing issues with you. I just want to take a few moments to tell you why I'm running for Congress. I'm running for Congress because I think we need more than a career politician. I think we need someone more than that's been there for 12 years and has really only been a voice or an advocate for their own party bosses. We need someone that is there for us, that is our advocate and our voice. That's why I'm running for Congress. We need someone who is engaged. I can't tell you how many times I hear it over and over again. The people, whenever we go to Washington, there's no one in the office to meet with. They don't even meet with the office anymore because there's not someone that's there to really be engaged with them. We need someone that is engaged, both in Washington, that is willing to meet with folks, listen, sit down, trying to find solutions and trying to see where are there resources that may be appropriate to bring back to Louisville. But we also need someone that's going to be available here in Louisville. So we need an engaged person that listens, is looking for solutions, and is willing to work to try to identify how we can try to resolve some of the issues that have occurred here in Louisville. We also need someone to be a leader. You can't really be a leader if you're not engaged. And so we need leadership. And we need leadership that is bipartisan, and I can't say that strongly enough. We need to have bipartisan leadership. I think we're all very concerned about the hyper-partisanship that is occurring in Washington. So we need bipartisan leadership. We don't need someone that's toxic. We don't need someone that is constantly criticizing or someone that is divisive. Because when you've got someone that is being divisive, then no one's willing to reach across the aisles and work with you and make a difference. So when that happens, the loser when that happens is Louisville. And that's my concern. I think Louisville has been the loser. I think when I first came to Louisville to practice law over 25 years ago, one of the things we all talked about were our peer cities and trying to keep up with our peer cities like Nashville and Indianapolis. I can tell you my fear is in the last 12 years is that Nashville and Indianapolis have passed us by. They have passed us by. And that's because we need stronger leadership. We need someone to be engaged. We need a bipartisan leader to be in Washington who is able, it doesn't matter who's in power, Republicans or Democrats, willing to reach across the party aisles to say, we need to fix this issue. We don't need to be sniping and being divisive. And my concern about Louisville is that, and in fact that was even confirmed in the Courier Journal article that you probably saw this weekend in the Courier. When it talked about our peer cities and the fact that millennials are not coming back to Louisville, and I thought this is a true indication of the symptom. This is a problem. And what they pointed out is that they were taking our peer cities and they were looking at Louisville, and if you notice the graph, Louisville was absolutely at the bottom. And the millennials have made the choice to not come back. We need a voice. We need an advocate in Washington. We need someone that is there to try to help us create jobs and grow our economy. Create jobs and grow our economy so that our millennials will want to come back home. We do not need to be on the bottom list, surpassed by almost twice as many millennials that come back to Nashville that come back here to Louisville. I can tell you that we do need someone that is more effective in Washington. The Center for Effective Lawmaking, which is a nonpartisan think tank that is well respected, they have found our congressman to be ineffective. And I point out one issue is that he's been there, as he noted, for 12 years. And in 12 years, he has passed two bills. And one of those bills was to rename a post office here in Louisville. In the last 10 years, he hasn't even passed a bill. And the Center for Effective Lawmaking, which is the nonprofit think tank that rates and ranks our congressman, has said they have found him to be ineffective. I'm a 25-year veteran from down here in Louisville and working in healthcare. As they said, I've been the former chair of the American Bar Association's Health Law Section. And I stepped out of that role because I decided I wanted to go into public service. I wanted to be a voice. I wanted to be an advocate for our state's most vulnerable populations. And that's why I'm running for Congress, because I want to be a voice. I want to be an advocate for this community. We've got to have that. We can no longer afford to have a career politician that is not providing that to us in Washington, D.C. We need that strong voice, that strong advocate. Let me also just say that
You'll wrap up quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me also just say that, and this is just a quick spoiler alert in case you haven't already kind of noticed, is that my opponent, when I've been on the campaign trail, seems to be trying to make this race about Trump and about Bevin. And I just want you to know that this race, I think that that's really kind of trying to be a distraction from his sort of failed 12-year career in Congress. But let me just say that I'm not these folks. I'm my own individual. I'm an independent voice. And as an independent voice, I want to go to Washington to work for you and to be your advocate. Thank you.
We'll cut you off right there. I'm sure we'll get into both those topics as we go along here. Most of the questions today are going to come from you, but before we get to that part of it, we want to give the candidates themselves an opportunity to ask each other a question. And John, since you went first in the opening statement, you get the first question to Vickie.
Great, thank you. Vickie, as you know, Connect was the most successful implementation of the Affordable Care Act in the country, helping more than 500,000 Kentuckians gain access to health coverage, about 80,000 here in Louisville, and cut the uninsured rate by more than 60%. As Governor Bevin's Health and Family Services Secretary, you wrote the Medicaid 1115 waiver that will cause at least 95,000 of these, by the waiver's own admission, Kentucky citizens to lose their coverage. These are people who, by definition, are working but don't make enough to afford coverage, or their employer doesn't provide coverage. How does taking the only source of health care away from tens of thousands of Kentucky families help them or the Commonwealth?
Well, first of all, Connect is nothing more than a website. That's all it was. And so I think it's important to know that whenever most states, at least 38 other states, have decided to use the healthcare.gov. Connect was a decision that the state made under Beshear, where he took federal funds and he decided to do a state IT system to try to help people apply for their Medicaid benefits. But you could also use the federal website, and 38 other states decided to do that. And so all that was done is that we went to a federal website rather than a state website. And the issue about that also is that even though the federal government was willing to pay for the initial Connect website, they did not have any funds available for the maintenance and operation of that website. So there were millions of dollars that were going to be needed to be able to maintain that website. So if you're looking at millions of dollars to maintain and operate a website that you can get on the federal level that's just as good and 38 other states are using, we would have been foolish not to have done that. So that was only a website, and that's all it was, and it has nothing to do with whether people have or do not have benefits. Let me just say on the 1115, that's one of the reasons that I'm running for Congress. I'm running for Congress because I have seen the impact that happens whenever you have the federal government decides that they're going to mandate obligations onto the state. And as the congressman pointed out, or has pointed out numerous times, he was one of the architects of the Affordable Care Act, and Nancy Pelosi recruited him to be the spokesperson for the Affordable Care Act. And so he went around and talked people into let's make sure we pass the Affordable Care Act. But what the Affordable Care Act did is that it set up a horrible situation for the states. The states were mandated to go in and to expand Medicaid, but their subsidies start running out. And when the subsidies run out, the states are struggling. And so a number of other states, at least 20 other states, are also out there in the same predicament that Kentucky is now, because the federal government mandated benefits. And so they're looking to seek a waiver. Let me just make sure I make this perfectly clear. No one lost their benefits under this waiver. In fact, the waiver still hasn't even been implemented. But if it had been, no one would be losing benefits. But the 95,000 folks he talks about are just 95,000 individuals that the actuaries said, if they decided they wanted to transition from Medicaid, that they thought that because of the opportunities that the waiver afforded, they could then transition from Medicaid into an employer-sponsored insurance product. But no one was going to lose their benefits. We all want people to stay insured, and that's why the waiver was written that way.
Okay, we'll cut you off right there. We'll get more on that, I'm sure, later. But first, your opportunity now for a question for John.
Okay. John, according to news articles, you were one of the architects and the spokesperson for the ACA. The former CEO of Jewish hospitals stated often that the Affordable Care Act was one of the major reasons for the failure of Jewish Hospital. You now agree that the Affordable Care Act is broken, and you're now proposing to fix this problem that's been caused by the ACA by now going to the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All plan, a complete government takeover of health care and private insurance under a bill that's now going to that will now eliminate private insurance. My question is, knowing the adverse impact the bill will have on one of our largest employers, Humana, why are you now advocating to destroy yet another major employer in our community?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm glad you asked it. First of all, I'm very proud of the Affordable Care Act. Vickie gave me credit the other night for being the architect of the Affordable Care Act. I can't accept it all the credit. I had a lot of help. About 216 or 17 other Democrats in the House of Representatives and some senators as well. I'm very proud of the fact that in today's world, there are 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions who no longer have to worry about being able to get insurance. I'm very proud of the fact that 90,000 Louisvillians now have coverage who didn't have coverage before. I'm very proud of the fact that young people can stay on their parents' insurance policies till they're 26 and help transition through college and graduate school or taking a year off or doing an internship. I'm extremely proud of the fact that under the ACA, there are no more lifetime or annual limits on benefits so that a cancer diagnosis or a serious accident ends up bankrupting a family. Before the ACA, 800,000 American bankruptcies a year occurred due to medical costs. So yes, I'm proud of a lot of the things that the ACA did. And unfortunately, for the last few years, Republicans in Congress and in this administration have done everything they could to sabotage the ACA. We knew from day one there were going to be hundreds of unintended consequences from the ACA. We recognize that when you're dealing with 18% of the American economy, it's the biggest Rubik's Cube that anybody ever had to solve. We assumed that once the law was in place that a bipartisan group in Congress would be interested in fixing those problems. What happened over the last 8 years, Republicans in Congress voted 75 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no alternative, no replacement. They screamed repeal and replace, but there was never a replacement. That's the same criticism we're hearing from Vickie today, and I heard the other night. There is no option to the Affordable Care Act except two. One's to go back where we were, 800 bankruptcies a year, 18,000 unnecessary deaths a year, premiums that were rising at 38% a year in 2009 when we started debating this bill, or Medicare for all. And I'm convinced that Medicare for all is the right way to go. Now, I have never said, Vickie wants to put this around my neck, I never said I supported Bernie Sanders' plan. As a matter of fact, I've said Bernie Sanders' plan is not Medicare. Bernie Sanders' plan is unlimited health care for everybody whenever they want it with no cost. I don't think that can work. What I support is a system similar to where we are now, phased in, first to take in people 55 to 65, and then generally expanded to the general population. This is doable. I think it's affordable. When if we take the majority back in Congress and I will become chairman of the Budget Committee, one of the things we plan to do is have hearings on the whole concept of Medicare for all to see exactly what the impact on the budget would be and whether it's affordable or not. I think that's a conversation this country needs to have. Meanwhile, American corporations are competing across the world with companies that don't have to provide insurance for their employees. We're the only industrialized nation on earth that has employer-based insurance system. It's not because we're smarter than everybody, it's because of a historical anomaly. But I know where we're going. We're going to end up with a single-payer system. Now, quickly on Humana. When we were 2 weeks away from passing the Affordable Care Act in 2010, I got a call from a Humana executive who said, if you pass this bill, we're going to lay off 2,000 people in your district and it's going to be on your head. And I said, you're full of you know what, to him directly. The week after we passed it, the then CEO of Humana, Mike McAllister, was on Wall Street saying, this is a great opportunity for us. We can expand our Medicare business. 60% or more of Humana's business is administering Medicare. 80% of Humana's business is administering government health care programs. That's what they do. They do it better than anyone else.
You'll wrap this up, John, real quick?
So I think if we do Medicare for all, the government's not going to administer all of Medicare for 330 million or more people. They will look to a company like Humana who administered. As a matter of fact, I believe that's why Aetna wanted to acquire Humana. And by the way, Humana stock was $50 a share the day we passed the Affordable Care Act. It's now $325. The Affordable Care Act has been pretty damn good for Humana.
All right. Questions from the audience been submitted, and we're going to take those right now. Who is going to start first? Yes.
Hi, this is for, can you guys, is this on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this question is for both candidates. We've had a lot of questions talking about the NRA rankings that you each received, but there's one that's a little more on point. It says, this year's budget contained provisions that allow any VA doctor to prohibit any veteran from owning a firearm without due process. What would you do to protect veterans' constitutional rights?
All right. It's a gun control question. Let's start with that with you.
Well, let me just say that I grew up on a farm, as you know, and as a farm girl, I was around firearms, and so I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. And I can tell you that I think that if I understood the question, if it's around veterans continuing to possess firearms,
Yes.
I think that as long as we always want to make sure that individuals that have firearms, that those individuals, it's reasonable for those individuals to have firearms in their possession. So I think that we do things like background checks. I think that it's, I support the Second Amendment, but I also think we need to have reasonable measures in place that just make sure that appropriate folks have firearms in their possession. So we start with things like background checks, and we make sure that we have an effective background check. And we try to, our Congress did pass a background check law just not a few months ago, but I think we need to continue to be vigilant about that. So I don't really know that it makes a difference if you're a vet or not. I think we want to have background checks, and we want to make sure that individuals that are the appropriate individuals have possession of firearms. I also think we need to make sure that we look at mental health issues. Mental health is usually a factor if there's gun violence, and so we need to make sure we look at the mental health issue. We need to continue to look at that. And one of the things we can do is that we've got laws that protect mental health information, and so we need to make sure that particularly if a physician thinks that someone has a mental health issue and they need to disclose that to someone that has a need to know because someone may be getting erratic, we need to make sure that that gets into a background check, for instance, or it gets to the right person that we have a need to know. Same thing at schools. I think by having, using telemedicine to make sure that we can actually get school nurses back into a school so that you have some person that a child can interact with, and we can try to detect some kind of a mental health issue as early as possible. The other piece is that I think that we need to make sure we harden our schools. It's another issue around gun violence. We need to make sure that we've got appropriate security in our schools. And then we also need to have, I think, a new concept. That I think it's called a gun access restraining order. So whether you're a veteran or not, I think we all have a standard. We need to make sure that if someone detects that someone has erratic behavior, that we can actually, under a gun access restraining order, someone that's close to you can go to a judge, petition that person be looked at, whether they should still have their firearm, make sure that there's due process, and then those firearms can be taken away from that individual.
I'm going to cut you off right there if you don't mind.
Are we keeping time?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah. I should
sorry,
say,
who's
let's
keeping
try to
time?
keep these answers as brief as possible, to a minute if possible. She went longer that time, so I'll give you a little more time this time.
Oh, I don't need any more time. I'm just curious as to how Vickie got an A from the NRA, because much of what she said I agree with. No, we do have to have universal background checks in this country.
That's what surprised me about his press release that we had. I thought, you've misrepresented everything about me, but anyway.
Go ahead, John.
Did you not get an A from the NRA?
I got an A, but
Thank
I
you.
also
Okay.
know that there are,
I got an F. I'm proud of it.
This is good. I like
I'm,
this.
I'm proud of my F.
But I think we're dealing with the gun issue the same way. So.
I've had an F every year I've been in Congress. Sometimes I don't really know why, because we rarely vote on gun legislation. As a matter of fact, I was one of the organizers of a sit-in on the House floor a couple summers ago with John Lewis, where we actually occupied the floor just so we could get a vote on universal background checks, get a vote on a bill that would keep people on the terrorist list, the no-fly list, from being able to buy guns, get a vote on very simple common sense measures to keep the hands out of criminals and those with mental illness. The issue of veterans and doctors, clearly we know that there is unfortunately, a lot of mental challenges facing a lot of our veterans, particularly those who are coming back from war zones, and a lot of gun violence is perpetrated by those with mental challenges. So I can understand why there is you want a physician, if he or she is treating a veteran for some mental problems, to be able to intervene to make sure that that veteran is checked out before he's given a weapon. So I think that makes sense. But again, what we have asked for in Congress, when I say that, the Democrats, because unlike the general world, there's not a lot of common ground, as you hadn't noticed, in between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and it is Mars and Venus, and that's not where the public is. But I know the public is for common sense gun safety legislation. 90% of the American people are for universal background checks. 75% of NRA members are for universal background checks. So it's bizarre that we can't even get a vote on the floor of the House, and that's a question for Republican leadership.
Next question.
This question is directed to Vickie. In the GLI candidate guide, you wrote that the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Act, passed by Congress in May, has made positive changes to allow our community to thrive. Could you explain more about its impact? And then there's a closely related question. In Congress, how would each of you plan on using your elected position to ensure Louisville competes with peer cities?
Again, get as many of these questions in. If you keep your answer as brief as possible, then I'll give John a chance to respond as well.
And remind me about what your first question was. I'm sorry.
Your GLI candidate guide, you talked about Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Act passed by Congress in May was going to be great for Louisville. Elaborate on that.
Okay, I'm assuming that has to do with the banking laws, I believe, is where that question was about. And what I had said in my survey is that I was pleased about the fact that the Dodd-Frank had been revised, and because unfortunately many of our financial institutions had gotten caught up in some of the too big to fail issues, and so it was important, I think, to go back and look at the Dodd-Frank laws and to make sure that our banks, our local banks, can then regulate. We can lift some of those regulations so that they can actually function better. Because I think if our banks are able to function better, that has a huge economic impact on our communities. We need to be able to go to our banks, know that we can still qualify for loans, that our banker is making those decisions. A lot of those decisions were taken out of the hands of banks, and so we needed to make sure that those decisions could remain on a more local level. And so I think that the changes in the banking laws can have a huge impact on our communities and can help with economic development. I also think that certainly the tax cuts have had a huge impact. I think the tax cuts, what we now know is that we are seeing the best economic growth that we've seen in over 50 years. We know that essentially that the average household income is now rising quickly. We know that the unemployment rates are going down. They're at a 50-year low. And so, the tax cuts have also had a huge impact on our community, and I think we want to continue to see and support those tax cuts.
All right, John.
Well, first of all, let me deal with the last part first, which I don't think Vickie addressed, and that's what government can do. I'll tell you some of the things that I did, and Vickie said, oh, I only have 2 bills with my name on it in 12 years. That doesn't mean I haven't had legislative accomplishments and important ones that actually have benefited Louisville. One of the things we did in 2008, I convinced Nancy Pelosi to come to Louisville. We met at Louisville Assembly Plant with the entire Ford management team, including Bill Ford, and we discussed the possibility of creating a low-interest loan program for companies to retool to build advanced technology motor vehicles. Nancy was so impressed that we went back. I was championing that bill. We created a $5.9 billion program which enabled Ford to borrow $600 billion. Well, I'm not sure they borrowed all the $600 million, but they made a $600 million investment then because of that availability of that money, retooled the Ford plant. They now have 3,000 more employees than they did before, and they're making, as you know, all the Ford Escapes in the country. A similar situation, I championed a bill that an amendment which actually became part of a big energy bill to provide, we already had a tax credit. I'm sure many of you have taken advantage of it. If you buy an energy efficient appliance, you get a tax credit for doing that. I said, if that's the case, why don't we create a tax credit for the manufacturers of energy efficient appliances if they build them in the United States? That was part of an energy bill that was passed. When we passed that, GE brought 3 different lines of appliances back to Appliance Park, hired 1,300 additional employees. So those are some of the things that you can do that actually do create jobs, promote economic growth, and are very innovative. And again, I've done several of those while I've been in Congress, and I'm very proud of that.
Let me ask a quick follow-up question. You mentioned the tax cuts and your support for them and the stimulation of the economy. We're facing an increasing federal deficit. Do you believe, and I ask you both this question, do you believe the tax cuts are primarily to blame for that, or government spending on entitlement programs, as Senator McConnell has said?
Well, funny you should ask. At 11 o'clock, I was on a national call with media with 2 U.S. senators and another member of the House to talk about Mitch's proposal yesterday that we cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security to pay for the deficit. That deficit was largely created by the reduction in revenue from the tax cuts. $92 billion less in corporate revenue coming into the Treasury this year over last year, and the increase in the deficit is $113 billion. So yes, the tax cuts were predominantly responsible for the added deficit. That deficit is going to exceed $1 trillion within a couple of years, and a lot of that is due to the tax cuts. Meanwhile, American corporations have bought back this year, 2018, $775 billion worth of their stock. $775 billion worth of their stock. So they weren't hiring people. They weren't, some of them gave $1,000 bonuses to some of their employees, well publicized. That amounted to about 6% of American corporations. Amazon bought back $64 billion worth of its own stock. So the tax cuts, again, are responsible for the deficit. It's interesting to hear Vickie talk about it because all the polling is that the tax cuts did not fool the American people. They're it's very unpopular nationally, and that's why most Republican candidates have decided not to talk about the tax cuts, because the American people know they were scammed.
All right. Vickie, tax cuts.
Let me just say that as I've been out in this community and I've been walking from neighborhood to neighborhood and knocking on doors, I hear resounding support for the tax cuts. I can tell you that folks are really upset whenever they talk about the fact that our congressman stood on the floor of the House and called him a sham and called him a horror show. And folks are upset because just a few weeks ago, this will give you an example. When I was out in part of the city, I was walking with a minister. And the minister, as we were walking and knocking on doors and talking to different folks, he said to me as we were just walking down the road, he said, I want to thank you all for those tax cuts, the Republicans have done a huge favor for the American people. He said people in my parish, now they're able to spend money. They've got a little extra money. And so people that are in business, they see an uptick in their business. And he said, for my family, let me just tell you what that meant to my family. He said it means $45 more a week in my paycheck. $45. Well, now, if you're Congressman Yarmuth and you're a member of Valhalla and you go to Ireland to play golf, maybe that's not a lot of money to you. But for the average Joe, let me tell you, $45 a week means a lot. What he said to me was, $45 a week means that we can now afford most of our groceries. $45 a week means that my family, as a minister, our family can now probably buy a car, and we'll be able to buy a new car. He said, I don't find these a sham. I don't find these a horror show. I want you to know that I am a fiscal conservative. I would want to be fiscally responsible when I go to Washington. I'll look for every way to try to save taxpayer money. I did that when I was the Secretary of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. When I went there, I got rid of 110 regulations. It saved $30 million a year for our Kentuckians by just doing that one simple thing, addressing unnecessary regulations. When I get to Washington, I'm going to make sure that, hey, read the bills, and then make sure that when you write a bill, that when you write a bill in such a way that you're not leaving it so open-ended that the unelected bureaucrats then end up implementing that bill through regulations. And we need to make sure we go back and look at those regulations on a regular basis and have justification for regulations because they cost the taxpayer millions of dollars.
Okay, let's stop right
By
there,
the way,
if you don't mind.
I
Yes.
never said sham, I said scam. And
Oh.
the reason I said,
Sorry, maybe I misspoke.
well, there's a huge
Sham or scam?
No,
Let me
there's
see.
a huge difference because the reason I use the word scam is because what the Republican tax cut did was give middle-class America a little break. I strongly support it. Most Democrats did. They made that break temporary. They made the huge tax cuts for corporations and the wealthiest Americans permanent. That's the scam.
Quick response, we move on.
Yes, I'll just go back to again that these tax cuts are now getting to the people, to everyday Joes, the middle class. Let me give you a couple of other examples. Caldwell Tanks in this community. Caldwell Tanks gave over a 10% increase in their in salaries to over 400 of their employees. Humana raised the base rate to $15 an hour. I could go on and on, but these tax cuts are now are going into the pockets of the taxpayers, and that's where it belongs.
All right, enough tax cuts. Next question, please.
We received several questions about legal and illegal immigration, specifically your all's position on abolishing ICE. So would address that to both candidates.
All right, I think you go first this time, I believe.
Okay. I support ICE, and I've been on record as supporting ICE. I don't know how we could really have an immigration and customs area if we don't have an ICE. And so I have been supportive of ICE, and I think that we need to make sure that we keep an entity like ICE in place. We need to make sure that they're protecting our borders. Let me just say this. I noticed that the congressman appeared to have waffled on his answer about ICE because there's plenty of indication that he agrees with sanctuary cities and he also has not been supportive of ICE. But I saw one of his latest answers was that he does support ICE. But I will point out that there was a resolution that appeared before the House just a few weeks ago, H.R. 990. And H.R. 990 was nothing more than a resolution that was presented to the congressman to say, do you support ICE or not? And by overwhelmingly, most people said, yes, we resolved that we support ICE. Our congressman voted present. He would not vote that he supported ICE.
John.
First of all, I don't support abolishing ICE. I never have. I don't know why my position is so confusing to Vickie, but what I've said is I don't support abolishing ICE because we're going to need an enforcement agency for immigration laws. We'll have one regardless of what it's called. What we do need is increased accountability, increased oversight, and new policies. By the way, ICE does not protect our borders. ICE is not responsible for border security. ICE is responsible for internal enforcement of our immigration laws. I have been called by numerous citizens in this community talking about abuses from ICE. I've had a meeting with the head of ICE. He lied to me to my face. Now, he may not have known he was lying, but he said they weren't doing things that we had photographic evidence that they were doing. So, again, we're going to have an enforcement agency. We need an enforcement agency. ICE is not treating our citizens and our permanent residents and our immigrant population with the respect and the due process that they deserve. So I don't know what's confusing about that or why I haven't changed my story. I've said that from day one when I was asked on the street about it back during the protest. Secondly, about immigration. I was part of a bipartisan group in 2013. They called us the Gang of Eight. We didn't think of ourselves as a gang, but 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, we met every day for 7 months. Every day we were in session for 7 months to try and craft a comprehensive immigration proposal. We got there. Earlier that year, the Senate, on a bipartisan basis, had passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill, dealt with border security, dealt with employment, dealt with guest workers, dealt with reunification of families. It dealt with the dreamers, the kids who were brought here as children and have not known any other country. We crafted a bill which we were convinced was going to get 260 to 280 votes in the House, more than enough to pass. Then Speaker Boehner, for some reason, would not bring it to the floor. It's a crime that he didn't, because if we had been able to do it, a lot of the problems we're seeing right now would have been avoided. And I hope and pray that we get back to that. Reforming our immigration system is not only a necessity, it's not optional activity. We have a broken system in many ways. But more importantly, a comprehensive immigration proposal, if not adopted, represents a great opportunity for this country, a great opportunity to help, and this is a long discussion that I won't go into, to help many of our programs like Social Security and Medicare, a great opportunity to stimulate economic development. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the Senate passed bill back in 2013 would increase GDP by 1.5%. That's an enormous boost to the economy. So again, I hope that we can reassemble that bipartisan spirit and deal with our immigration problems, because again, it's a national necessity.
John's answer went beyond ICE to the general immigration reform, so I want to ask you about that. If you respond to that part of the question about immigration reform as a whole.
Yes, and I think we do need to fix immigration. I think that immigration needs to be addressed. I think certainly just from a legal immigration perspective, we need to make sure that we simplify, we need to streamline. It's a very confusing and very time-consuming process. We need to address immigration reform. I think we also need to find a pathway to citizenship for our DACA citizens. We need to be compassionate, and so I'm anxious to go to Washington to work on that issue. I also think we need to look at H-2A and H-2B visas. We have so many companies, and certainly, as I said, I'm a farm girl. I understand the value of agriculture workers. We also need to find a better path and an easier path to bring temporary workers into the United States. The federal government is looking right now to try to ease some of the regulations around the H-2A process for agriculture workers. So once they come in, you make it easier for them to go back and forth. I think that's a very compassionate thing for families. I think you want them to be able to do that. So I think we need to do the same thing for the H-2Bs. And so I'm looking forward to working on all 3 of those issues whenever I get to Congress. And so but I agree we need to deal with fixing immigration.
Okay. Next question.
We received several questions about Justice Brett Kavanaugh and President Trump. Specifically, this question is directed to the congressman. Will you vote to impeach either Justice Kavanaugh or President Trump? If not, why not?
I believe that President Trump has committed impeachable offenses. I've co-sponsored a resolution for impeachment. I don't believe we should act on it. I wanted to make a statement saying that I believe he has done impeachable things. Impeachment is not a legal process, it's a political process. And for it to be legitimate, it has to be bipartisan. And until the point at which there are both Republicans and Democrats who think it is necessary to impeach not just this president, but any president, I don't think we should actually waste the Congress's or the country's time in doing it. And I would say the same thing about Justice Kavanaugh. Obviously, I would have preferred a different justice. Well, maybe it's not obvious, but I'll tell you I would have preferred a different justice. But I don't think at this point, unless it is proven that he lied to the committee during his confirmation hearings, I don't think there would be any grounds for impeachment at this point.
All right. Vickie?
I think that the congressman has made the point for the Center for Effective Lawmaking, the entity that I brought up at the beginning that said, when they were looking at who's being effective in Congress or not. And one of the things they found is that our congressman is one of the most partisan members of Congress. And so it's hard to believe that he could say that, yes, he filed articles of impeachment against our president, but yet he doesn't anticipate even moving forward on that. That's why I said what I said at the beginning. We have to be careful about what we say and we do. If you're so divisive and you're so polarizing and you're so critical, then you're not able to reach across party lines. Because remember, we have two different parties here. And what I want you to know is that I will be a fearless bipartisan. I will be a fearless bipartisan. I'll be respectful to people. I would not be filing things if I wasn't serious about moving forward on those. I find that to be just appalling. I really do. That I would do something like that to an individual and I had no intention of moving forward. We need a fearless bipartisan in Washington, and I want to be that person.
Question. Quickly, we're running out of time, but we're going to have a couple more questions if possible.
Do the candidates support legalized recreational marijuana?
You start first.
I believe that that is a question for states to answer, and I'm not hedging. We have 9 states now, plus the District of Columbia, who have legalized recreational marijuana. Canada legalized it today. If it were on the ballot in Kentucky, I would support it.
I will just say that, at least for the first part of the Congressman's, of John's point, I agree. I do think it's a state issue. I think that the federal government should not get into this debate. I do think that the states should decide how they want to use marijuana, and so I would leave that to the states. And again, I'm not hedging either. I just think it's a state issue and let each state deal with it.
I will add one thing if I can. Right now, as some people know, marijuana is scheduled by the Drug Enforcement Administration as a Schedule I narcotic. It's putting it on the same level as heroin and many other dangerous drugs. I think at the federal level we ought to deschedule it because that's crazy. And what it's done is it has caused tons of money at the federal level to be directed to fighting marijuana when marijuana is legal with a huge percentage of the population right now.
What about the rescheduling issue?
And we would differ there. I do think that we have a Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. That's their job. I would look to the FDA before I would just willy-nilly take it off of the Schedule I list. I look to them to make sure that things are safe, and so I would look to the FDA before that decision was ever made.
All right. I think we're out of time for questions, but we want to give each candidate an opportunity for a closing comment. And Vickie, since you went last on the opening comments, you get to go first on the closing.
I'll just hop down here, I think. Let me just say that I really appreciate you all being here this afternoon, and I appreciate you giving us an opportunity to talk, and I think it helps everyone understand where do folks stand on the issues, and it's going to help you, I think, on November the 6th. As I said at the beginning, I think that Louisville needs an advocate. We need a voice in Washington. Even the third parties, like a Center for Effective Lawmaking, has indicated that our congressman is ineffective. And so we can go back and we can just do the same. We can elect the same career politician to go back that's been there for 12 years. Or I feel like that I've worked very hard. I've known many of you. I've worked with you for years in downtown Louisville. And you can elect a fresh voice, someone that really does want to be bipartisan, someone that doesn't have the baggage that someone else has, someone that wants to work on tough issues, someone that is a fearless bipartisan, and someone that I think can bring real value, because my background as a healthcare lawyer, I think that's needed on a federal level. I think it's one of the big issues that affects every American. And when you look at the polls, healthcare is the #1 issue, along with the economy, that's on everyone's mind. And I feel like I can go there and I can bring real value to try to fix the Affordable Care Act, make sure that healthcare once again is going to be affordable, accessible, and that people have choice again. So I just want you to know I am a farm-raised girl. I'm looking forward to, and as a farm-raised girl, I grew up on a farm, and I understand the value of hard work, perseverance. I understand the value of fiscal responsibility. I also understand what it takes to put together a small business and what it takes to keep a small business going. And so I just want you to know that this farm-raised girl, I look forward to rolling up my sleeves, going to work for you, taking on the tough issues, being willing to reach across party lines and to be a voice and an advocate for you in this community. And I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, thanks to the Louisville Forum and to all of you for being so engaged in this conversation. Thanks to Vickie for participating as well and putting herself forward. It's not an easy thing to do to become a candidate for office. Over the last 12 years, I know Vickie says that I'm not engaged, which is interesting. I don't think she's seen my schedule. I've done over 5,000 constituent contacts in Louisville alone. 200 schools, hundreds of businesses, churches, community festivals. I have put myself out there where people have access to me because, again, I think that is the most important part of this job, is connecting people to their government. And I think that I've been received well, and I've established a relationship with this community where I'm trusted. Vickie's running an ad that started today that talks about wild ideas I have, wild ideas like healthcare for everyone. To me, that's not a wild idea. And I'm not afraid to have big ambitions for our government. I think our government can do much more in making healthcare truly a right and not a privilege. It needs to be. I believe government can do much more about guaranteeing retirement security for our citizens, which is one of the truly pressing issues of our time. It doesn't get discussed much. But our retirement security of our hardworking citizens is in jeopardy, whether they're government employees, whether they're private sector employees, or whether they're just ordinary citizens. I believe government is the way that we organize our responsibilities to each other. And that's the way I've always handled my responsibilities in Washington. And I don't know this organization that says I'm ineffective. I'm effective enough that my caucus has thought enough of me to say that I will be chairman of the Budget Committee if we take the majority back. And I'm in a leadership position in our caucus. And yes, Washington is a highly partisan atmosphere right now. But it is not a hostile, toxic environment. And I think if you ask anybody on Capitol Hill, ask any Republicans, including people like Trey Gowdy and Mick Mulvaney and you name it, that I have great relationships with Republicans. And my biggest regret is that, unfortunately, the American people see what we do on television and how we talk, and they think that they should hate the other side. We don't hate each other. Citizens shouldn't hate each other because they disagree with each other. What we need is leadership in both parties that actually invite bipartisanship. Over the last 8 years that Republicans have been in control, Republican leaderships have constantly insisted on what they call the Hastert rule, which was they won't pass anything unless a majority of their caucus supports it. And that leads to, unfortunately, a strict division on most issues. We need to figure out a way to get out of that. Just in closing, I will say, I heard a great line within the last couple days. It was in Madam Secretary, a show that I love, in which somebody had said to the president, "You don't ask for support, you inspire support." I have tried for the last 12 years to inspire support, and I will continue to do that if I'm sent back. But in the meantime, I'm not going to fail to ask for your support. So I would appreciate your consideration and your vote on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Again, let's hear for both these candidates, John Yarmuth, Vickie Glisson.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Lord.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our closing comments today on behalf of the entire Louisville Forum, we want to thank each one of the panelists and our guests today. As an expression of our appreciation, we have for each one of you a Louisville Forum Mint Julep Cup. May you use it in good spirits. Here we go. Derby Day will be here before you know it, right? Our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, November 14th. The topic of the meeting will be the November post-election roundup. Where do we go from here? It'll feature the Kentucky Democratic Party Chairperson Ben Self and Kentucky Republican Party Chairperson J. Macaulay Mac Brown. Reservations may be online at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail at 329-0111. Thank you once again. Have a nice day.